You're back with Dave and Mecky's Shiny Side Out on freedomslips.com. That's right, the number one listener-supported talk radio in the world, as Hawk says, and it's probably true. In fact, I know it to be true. Since it is listener-funded radio and you like what you hear, please go to freedomslips.com and push the donate button. It's on the site support page. It's on the left-hand side if you're in the chat, and your donation is greatly appreciated and helps run this station. I'd like to say hello to all the new listeners we have out there today. Thank you very much for joining, and I hope it's value to you. We're glad you're on board. Everyone who's subscribed to YouTube and Blogger and all the other things, welcome aboard. I hope your journey's easier now that you've got this information. Okay, we're halfway through show number 2. Oh, goodness me, which one is it? Let me have a look. It's 233. We have a guest, George Simpson. He's one of the key. Can I call you the key investigator, George?
Maybe recently, but not back when the case happened. It's so long ago. I wasn't involved in the research back then. So the key investigators were actually the. Can you hear me?
Yes.
It was probably Paul Norman would have been the original investigator. Paul Norman and Judith McGee and the Viewforce people and the police would have been the original investigators, but I've only been into UFO research and stuff over the last, say, 20, 25 years or so. I don't go back to when the case happened. It was 37 years ago or something. Yeah, so
that's how precise George is. Look at that. So
I was the same age as the pilot. I saw the day he disappeared. He was 3 months older than me. Frederick was, and I just turned 58. So he would have been 58 now if he was still around.
Wow. So I'm my next birthday. I'm 50. So. Right. We're not very far apart, and I really it was the time, I think, to get into this, because before that it was set aside. A lot of investigations. Why would the government even spend any money on looking into it if it wasn't real? There's a whole show on that one. But I just wanted to say, look, to Solaris. She precedes our show, and she had David Adair on today. Wow. The Rocket Man. He was big backstory there, and I've messaged him to see if we've got the ability to get him on. So Solaris had a great show once again, and in my intro I forgot to mention that, and I apologize to Solaris. And you should, if you don't know what I'm talking about, if Solaris, the word, doesn't mean anything to you, get yourself access to the archives, or if you tune in for our show at whatever your time zone is, go 2 hours earlier and tune into Solaris' show. You'd love it. Absolutely love it. Great guests all the time. We're halfway through, like I said, show 233 with George on. We've been talking about the Valentage case, and it's an amazing collection of events and information which leads me to believe that the plane did not crash into the ocean of its own accord. I don't think it crashed into the ocean at all. The plane and the pilot still remain missing after a huge search of Bass Strait in the days past the event. Nothing was found. There was an oil slick, but the oil was marine, not aviation oil. And I've got to tell you that the day that I met George, it was over the phone, and it was the day that MH370 went missing.
Oh, was it?
It was the day. That's when you called me.
Oh, okay.
That's the first time we came in contact with each other.
Okay.
And I was just about to do my show, and we chatted for a great deal of time on the phone, and yeah. And then I got back to my desk, and the whole thing had unfolded. I didn't even know MH370 had gone missing yet. Extraordinary. Right. And that's the way the world works, I'm afraid. It just, for me, it's like landing on your feet. Everything, sometimes it just lands in your lap. Sometimes it's thrown at you, and you should catch it. So After that, we've spoken a lot, and I've had you on the show before. It's a pleasure. Now, when we were leading into the break, we were talking about the possibility of, was there any possibility, is there any kind of connection to anything that the military might have known, done, or been a part of, we wonder, to do with the Valentage case. And you were talking about a military man, an Australian? No, or was it American?
American
American
who was
military
in Australia.
Man. Yep. And tell me more. So the Don Lane, the Don Lane show was an American Don Lane had a show here in Australia, and it was watched by all. It wasn't. It was on during the day, and a great show. Had a lot of comedy in it. Moonface was his sidekick, as we know him affectionately, Moonface, and there was a great comedy duo going on. It was a lot of fun.
Very funny man.
Yes. So
Bert Newton, just an amazing man.
Bert Newton, yes. And so we've set the scene. He wanted this American military man visiting Australia wanted to disclose something and requested an escort to and fro from the studios to where he was residing. What happened next?
Okay, well, this is I haven't been able to find out who this guest was, but I've had a clue now because you mentioned Stan Deyo.
Yep.
And I was talking about this to Bill Chalker recently, and he thought that might have been Stan Deyo too. I don't know if Stan Deyo is a decorated military officer from America. But anyway, the story got to me through an email that I got from somebody who had been reading about this. I wrote an article about this Valentage case with the pilot missing, and that the farmer said that he'd seen his UFO with the plane stuck on the side of it. Now, that rung a bell with these people who read my article in the Ufologist magazine. They said they remembered talking about that with their parents, or the parents are still alive, and they were talking with them about this. They said it was some TV show where some guy was going to go on the TV show and tell us something about the Valentage case that no Australians knew, but he thought we had a right to know. And he was demanding an armed escort to the TV studio for him and his wife, because they feared that they might get bumped off if they didn't have an armed guard with them, because that's how explosive the story was going to be.
They feared for their lives.
This is what the parents remember being on TV. The TV show was kind of promoted with, we're going to have this amazing story going to come out on the TV show. And the guest came on the show, and he was some sort of an American guy with military connections who said that what had happened in case was that Pine Gap had something to do with it.
Mm-hmm.
He said that Pine Gap is a top secret American base in the Northern Territory. They have some kind of surveillance drones, some kind of automatic drones of some kind that are electromagnetically propelled, and they are a disc shape, and there are big ones and small ones, and they can send them out anywhere to do surveillance, anywhere around the world, and they go out and they come back to Pine Gap. Now, this is what this military guy said, and he said that one day the large one came back with an aircraft stuck to the side of it. Right?
Yeah.
Now, I'd only just heard for the first time that there was a farmer saying that there was an aircraft stuck to the side of this flying saucer. Now, here's this military guy saying from the same time period, went on the Don Lane show and said that their circular drone, their big one, came back with an airplane stuck to the side of it one day. I've never heard of that expression ever used before, that there was a plane stuck to the side of something. And this guy said that it was it was a Cessna and that the pilot was in it and that he was alive. Now, I find it hard to believe, but he said that the pilot was alive. They've taken him in as part of their top secret program at Pine Gap.
Mm-hmm.
He'll have everything he ever needs for the rest of his life. He is not allowed to make contact with anybody in the outside world.
Wow.
Otherwise he'll be blowing their top secret base. Doing so. Now, again, I this is something I can't check out because I didn't know who the military guy was or the date of the program. Channel 9 do have all the old shows archived, and they will allow people for research purposes to come in and look at stuff if you're doing research. But you have to have the date of the program when it went to air or
That's
the
right.
name of the guest on the program. Well, they can't find it. And I don't have either of those things. The person who told me the story, the parents could not remember the name of the guest on the show who demanded this armed escort. So we don't know who it was, and I don't think Stan Deo would have demanded an armed escort, would he? I don't know.
Well, we've interviewed him, and in the interview he said that he did work at Pine Gap. But as a decorated, I don't know that he was decorated. So it's consistent because he said that there's an underground base there. Mm-hmm. And that story is like it collaborates that. I think it's an extraordinary addition to this Valentage case, which can't be ignored. It just can't be set aside. I'm actually on the Wikipedia page right now, and I know how difficult it is to try to get a copy of any program. I was on Romper Room, believe it or not, when I was a kid. They see he laughs. Yeah. Right. You're right. When I was a kid, and I actually I did some work as a contractor at Channel 7 in the same studios in Epping there. And while that was still there anyway. And I asked them, look, is it possible? You know, you talk to the right people, you're in the lunchroom and you get chatting. And I said, look, I was on Romper Room. And they go, really? You should ask them to get a copy of the thing. I said, well, okay, how do I do that? Well, talk to that fellow over there. So I talked to him, and he said exactly the same thing. We'd have to look through every one of them to find you. Do you know when it aired? No.
Right.
I didn't even know how old I was. Was I 3 or 4 or something, or 5 maybe? I don't know. It probably aired sometime, post filming. Don't know. My mother's passed away, so I can't ask her, and she'd have a vague memory of it as well. I think that they're not stored in any way, shape or form, and nothing's written on the can that's enough, like it doesn't have your name on the can. That would be yeah, exactly, and that's all you get.
That'd be it. Yeah.
So I worked there for a couple of months, and I was unable to get it, and I was so disappointed because just for my kids, for my own kids, just go, look, there's Dad on TV,
Yeah, right, yeah.
Yeah.
When he was a kid.
Yeah, that's right. When I was your age, look at that. And I could never do it. So thinking about this from the Don Lane show, extrapolating the same thing out, good luck with that.
Exactly.
You'd have to get a show list from somewhere and just ask for them all.
Oh, no, it might be possible to say we think that Stan Deo might have been a guest on the show. Can we look that up? That might be a good starting point. Because I've only recently started thinking that Stan might have had something to do with it. Don't know yet.
Because it was produced by Peter Feynman, who went on to do Crocodile Dundee. I think Pete Smith is no longer with us. I know Don Lane passed away in 2009.
I'm not sure about Pete Smith. I think Pete Smith's still around, but I think some of the other guys have passed on. Bruce Mansfield has passed on. He might have had something to do with it in those days. One of the producers of the show, though, was a lady, and I found her on Facebook, and I've been trying to contact her, but I think she's accepted my friend request, but she's never answered any questions. She was one of the producers of the Don Lane Show.
Oh, right.
And I've been trying to get somewhere to be able to speak to her about it, and I haven't had any luck so far. But that could be helpful if I could talk to her.
Well, it's an amazing
her name
lead.
escapes me right now.
It's an amazing lead to get close enough to be able to hear that, or it must be frustrating, I suspect, when you're investigating something and you get this unknown block. You're so close.
Yeah, it happens all the time though with research. You just got to expect things like that to happen. We have this the farmer's story, and we don't know who he was, so we can't find out. We can't ask his family. He might not still be around, but we can't ask his family because we don't know the family name, so we can't check anything. We can't find out anything. That's frustrating. It would be interesting to cross it off and say, no, well, that never happened, or maybe to verify it.
Oh, completely.
That's how it goes. I'll tell you what. So things are getting better these days. Look, somebody mentioned this book. I can hold this up so you can see.
Oh,
it.
I can't at the moment. Your
haven't got video.
video's just not coming through. What's the book for everybody?
There's this new book that's been presented, that's been published in America about the Aztec UFO incident. It's another crash thing, a bit like Roswell. I think the actual date of it was a year or two after. Oh, it was about 8 months after the Roswell.
Mm-hmm.
Now, another book was written about this about 20 or 30 years ago, published by William Steinman and another guy co-authored it with him, and they did a book on this same case. Where this flying saucer had landed, sort of crash landed, but it didn't really crash. It sort of landed intact at the top of a cliff, somewhere out in the countryside, in the middle of nowhere in New Mexico, in the New Mexican desert. Now, it was only about 8 months after the Roswell case. By then, the authorities knew not to publicise anything about it, and just to go in and retrieve it and keep people away. And they had to actually build a road up to get up to where this thing was. So it was a large object, and they had to have big loading trucks and everything. So they actually had to construct a road to bring this thing out, and they had to work out how to dismantle it as well. It was a big task for them, but a lot of locals found it first. And so these blokes have published this book. Now, it's published by Scott and Suzanne Ramsey. And it's got a preface by Stanton Friedman, and it's just called The Aztec UFO Incident. And it's taken them over 30 years of research to produce this book. And I found it was a really interesting read. I thoroughly enjoyed it. One of the really interesting things they said in it was, one of the theories at the time, around the time that the Roswell thing happened, was that we had very, very powerful radar in those days, and that the radar was interfering with the flight of these objects that came from some other part of the universe.
Mm-hmm.
The radar was very powerful. In this book, they talk about there were some Air Force bases, or there were some Air Force radar stations right across New Mexico, and there was a local a cafe where all the airmen used to go, and some of the airmen would find ducks, wild ducks that got too close to the radar and actually been microwaved in the air and killed in the air, and they fall in the car park. So the Air Force guys would pick up these half-cooked ducks, take them down to the cafe, and get the cooking process completed.
That's great.
That's powerful radar. Yeah.
So this Aztec, I appreciate it. I was wondering, that the news trucks. So the news trucks have a satellite dish, and they were setting up at a protest march that I was at, and they suggested to me that I not stand where I was standing, and I said, "Oh goodness, why?" And he goes, "Because you're in the way of the signal, but that wouldn't harm the signal," they said, but it really should. You'll get cooked. Just get out of the way.
don't want to be there. No.
Yeah, you just don't want to be there, exactly. And I thought that was an interesting story. But then I remember I recounted there was at the Sydney University in Macquarie, the Macquarie University, there was a satellite uplink dish, and they said the janitor said we always find dead pigeons in it.
Yeah.
Because they'll hop up. It's not just being sitting in the dish, but they'll hop up to where it feels warm.
Right.
And that's what cooks them. And I you know,
They get cooked alive.
yeah, they get cooked alive because it's nice and warm. Oh, that's really good. And then they just fall off the perch. It's but the
That's one way to get rid of the pigeons in the city. Cook them alive.
But you're absolutely right. The marine radar in Sydney Harbour, where I worked, I don't think there's a security risk by suggesting what existed then. But on the top floor of one of the buildings that faces in North Sydney down to the harbour, because of the electrical interference that was occurring with the marine radar for the shipping in Sydney Harbour and our computer system, we had to put this reflective foil up on the windows.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So I completely understand the power of these things, and I wouldn't have wanted to live in the harbour if I didn't have this protective foil up. My goodness me, thinking about how you get irradiated every couple of seconds. So, but for anyone who doesn't know, the Aztec or New Mexico UFO incident that had 16 humanoid bodies that were recovered.
It's a very interesting case. But what's really good about this was I was halfway through reading the book, and the author's name, Scott Ramsey, I just looked him up on Facebook, and there he was. So I contacted him.
Yeah.
We became friends on Facebook. So I'm reading his book, and I'm talking to the author at the same time while I'm reading his book. It was amazing. It was fantastic. You could never do that in the past, you know. You'd have to get somebody to come out from overseas to meet them if they were an author and you wanted to talk to them about what they've written.
Yes.
But with Facebook nowadays, you can just, if they're online, you can actually contact them. And I said to him, look, I'll do a review of your book. And they said, oh, thank you very much. And I went into the Ufologist magazine, you know, and they were very pleased that I'd written a positive review of their book. It's taken them 30 years to produce it. It's a great book.
That's extraordinary. You know, could you imagine being in high school today, and when they say, "Oh, you know, we're going to be looking at this book," and you go, "Oh, okay." So you just go home and you ask the author of the book for an interview. That's amazing. So, do you know any more of the Aztec incident?
Oh, just that there was many creatures found that were all dead in the craft and everything. It took them several days to work out how to dismantle this thing and get it onto the trucks, and they had to of course construct the road and everything. One of the interesting things in the book is about one of the skeptics, this guy Carl Flock, which a lot of people would have heard of, who passed away a few years ago, had told them that the roads in that area hadn't changed much in 50 or 60 years. And Scott Ramsey's done all this. He actually was a friend of that guy, Carl Flock, who was a skeptic. But he actually made it up. He was just lying through his teeth. He just made it up for one reason or another. It suited him at the time to say that we didn't. The roads were the same nowadays as they were in those days. There's been major changes to the roads. There've been significant upgrades to the roads, and they've even changed the actual positions of the places where the roads actually go, where they are. So everything has changed. It couldn't have changed more in that area than it has in the last 50 years. But these skeptics just make the story up to suit themselves. It doesn't surprise me at all. You know, the skeptics often are so far off the mark that it's not funny. But it seems that they don't care too much about the truth in many cases. And Carl Flock was one of those guys. He just said whatever he felt would support his case.
Do you think that the skeptics only want to build a name for themselves as a skeptic, so they just launch at everything? Because
No, I don't think so.
Do you think that they? I mean, would they earn an income from being a skeptic, or are they just the rock solid, member of the community who wouldn't, who can find an explanation?
No, I don't think they're any of those things. Definitely not rock solid members of the community.
No, not from our point of view, but from the other people who don't want their world shaken by something, by any revelation.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
Yeah.
Look, the point is you can't change the facts. You can't make up facts. You can't change the facts just to support your theory, especially if your theory is struggling to survive against all odds,
Mm-hmm.
You can't do that. It's unscientific to do that. And yet they claim that the ufologists are unscientific. Well, you know what I mean? It's they love to. They try to attack every case, and they try to discredit it. And what their latest tactic is to make up stories that cases that have been well documented and well understood and thoroughly investigated either were never investigated or that they've now found witnesses who are now admitted that they've hoaxed it all. And they just make this stuff up, and they have no evidence to support their view, but it throws enough mud on the wall that enough people will stop giving those cases. The latest one is that Lonnie Zamora case. It's in all the UFO books of the last 50 years. Mentioned this Lonnie Zamora case from 1965 or 66, where he was a police officer. He saw this thing.
That's right.
He saw it. Yeah. Well, they've now said, oh no, it wasn't what he said it was, and all this sort of stuff, and it's just wrong. And it's been thoroughly investigated and thoroughly checked out, and they're trying to muddy the waters. They're trying to discredit people who are totally credible, and they just do it because for some reason they just love to attack UFO cases. And I don't know what the agenda is behind that. I mean, look, it's a huge universe out there, and that's another thing we really should mention. The Seth Shostak, who's the head of the SETI organization, he's one of the greatest skeptics of all.
Yes.
Was on TV about 2 years ago saying that we now know, we didn't know 12 months ago, but we now know, folks, that 1 in every 5 stars you can see in the night sky has a planetary system around it, and it probably has an Earth-like planet among those planets. 1 in 5 stars.
1 in 5, yeah, that's right.
Yeah. That is a huge change from what they used to say. That means there are literally billions of planets like Earth out there, because they're uncountable, the number of stars.
And and just within our own galaxy, they're uncountable. Yeah. Let alone all the other galaxies that are out there.
Yeah, and so if 1 in 5 stars in the Milky Way galaxy has a planetary system, there are billions of Earth-like planets out there.
That's true. Yeah, and look, it's no surprise to me that there would be life elsewhere, especially with the term panspermia. If you just wanted to explore that alone, where there was recently a metallic sphere captured by this little array, like a CD drawer that went out and caught space dust, and then they brought the CD drawer back in again, like on a computer, and they landed this it's just a high altitude balloon, and they landed it again, collected the materials, and found that there was it looked like a titanium sphere about the size of a pinhead or smaller, and when they tried to move it away from where it was, they'd broken the outer shell like an egg, and when they moved it away from its point of stuck to this material, it left behind an organic trail.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and that's one of the latest things, and they've determined that there's enough material in that to have been an instigator from somewhere else. Cosmically, space, and this is the determination by scientists, is no longer a barrier for life. So if you were to think about that, and our Earth's sun is a third or fourth generation star in this location. So there was a previously probably a larger one that popped, and then smaller ones grew and have lived their lives and popped, and this is either this one or it's the next one on from that. Thinking about how long each one of those events must take, because you can't have gold on Earth if your star is a brand new star from scratch. If it was the first stars in the universe, we wouldn't have gold.
Oh, okay.
Because gold is made in a Big Bang, in a nova.
Well, they say that everything in the solar system was formed from the dust of exploded stars.
Mm-hmm.
Everything, every atom on the planet is from. So, and one astronomer was recently saying it's interesting that you've got different atoms in your left hand to what you've got in your right hand, but those atoms all came from somewhere. Yep. And he said that the atoms in your left hand, some of those atoms might have come from a different part of the universe to the atoms that are on the other side of your hand, and your other hand could have come from another part of the universe, from a different exploded star.
Yes.
That's pretty interesting.
That is completely interesting. So this is the kind of thing. So when you're looking at how diverse our existence is, how fragile it is, when I mean fragile, I mean, look, we've got a sun. If there wasn't any more light from the sun, pretty much we'd get wiped out. We get wiped out if there was a meteor impact, either on land or an ocean, sufficiently large to cause a dust cloud that would be like a nuclear winter. If it went into the ocean, there'd be a wave that washed over most of the land surfaces on the Earth, and then it would rain down the rest of that water that it plopped up into space and went into our upper atmosphere as well. And there'd be a debris field. And you think about all this stuff, right? It does go without saying that I'd have to suggest quite heavily to anyone listening that there would be life everywhere. I believe all of the people who say they've been into space and use the words that the universe is teeming with life.
Yep. Well, that wouldn't surprise me. Look, I'd like to look at it this way. Why would just this planet be the only part of the universe that exists entirely on its own and is the only example of life in the entire universe? Why would that be? I mean, the Earth, right, and our solar system here is only a very small part of the entire universe, but it is a part of it. So why should it be any different to any other part of it?
That's right. So before the comment of space is no longer a barrier for life, we'd thought that we were so insulated that it was rather impossible that life could come here from anywhere else without, mechanical means. Let's call it mechanical, whether it's anti-gravity or whatever, or intelligence. And then just collision between two things would cause a debris to leave, and eventually it could find its way here intact throughout the universe, traveling, and we just happen to collide with it. And that could be the start of life on the planet, or it could introduce new life to the existing planet. In fact, there are thoughts down this line as well that some of the bacteria or viruses that we're encountering aren't just self-perpetuated on the planet, that we're flying through dust, and it's in that. Remember, not everything burns up as it enters the atmosphere, because it's traveling at the same speed or just a little slower than the Earth, and we just sort of collide into it softly.
Yeah, look, the other thing is, the meteorites
Yes.
that come in sometimes have organic material in them that aren't of this planet, but they come in from outer space. You've heard of the Murchison meteorite? There's a town called Murchison in Victoria.
Oh, no, I haven't.
A little country town. Okay, well, Murchison, in this, I remember this in the newspapers when I was in primary school. This meteor came down, and so when they hit the ground, they become a meteorite. It's a meteor if it's airborne or in space, and it becomes a meteorite once it's hit the ground. Now, this one that came down in Murchison, Victoria in 1969 was full of organic materials and organic matter. It had amino acids in it. I've handled
Wow.
a piece of the Murchison meteorite. My neighbour he wrote a book about them. He was a scientist, and he had a whole lot of meteorites in his home. He had a collection of them, and he had a piece of the Murchison, and it's a stone meteorite. And if you snap it and you smell it, have a sniff of it, it smells like methylated spirits. This rock. So imagine a piece of rock. If you break it, it smells like methylated spirits.
Wow.
Well, yeah.
That's something else, really, isn't it?
It's got so many organic materials in it, and it's called the Murchison meteorite. It was a chondrite. It's full of chondrules. Meteorites have there's a whole science just on the makeup of meteorites, and it was a chondrite. Chondrules are unknown particles that are only found in meteorites, little white dots in the stone in a meteorite, and they're called chondrules, and they believe to have had something to do with the beginning of the universe, that they formed when the Earth was first formed, when the universe was first formed. These things called chondrites existed, and they're in a lot of meteorites and they're called chondrules. They're in meteorites. Murchison was full of these. This Murchison rock was full of these chondrules, and also a lot of organic material and previously unknown amino acids that were foreign to this planet until the Murchison meteorite landed. Now, in the same week, another meteorite landed in a place in Mexico called Allende, 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 a little town in Mexico, and it was the same material as what landed here in Murchison in Victoria.
Oh, that's interesting.
And it had the same amount of the same composition and the same things in it. It had the same amount of organic material. So they think that it probably exploded somewhere way out in space and went in two different directions. But the angle that it came down into Murchison is exactly the same trajectory and angle as it landed in Mexico, but just the Earth had turned.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, so, interesting, from the same direction.
Well, according to science, before the space is no barrier, the soupy-like pre-Earth with amino chains building was said to have been the origin of life on Earth. And so if you can imagine that's the panspermia of these amino acids coming to Earth and kick-starting this mix.
Yeah.
That is something else.
There's also other things, they say that our chromosomes look like they've been cut and pasted.
Oh, yes.
We've been played with, so at a much later stage. And so somebody's been playing with our genetics, which we weren't able to do way back.
Yeah, we spoke with Lloyd Pye about that before he passed away.
Yep.
And
I used to talk to him all the time on emails and that. Yeah, he's a lovely bloke.
A lovely fellow too, yes. And he mentioned the changing of 48 to 46 chromosomes from hominids to humans, which didn't seem to match any other chain of family line of creatures on the planet, and it would have been an intervention. There would have been interference there. And so when you match all the research that's going on back to the real history of the planet, it seems like the ancient peoples really had a clue to what was going on. They told us by writing it all down, including the Sumerians, that, you know, people from space visited them and taught them everything they knew.
Yep. Yeah, well, the Aboriginals say that. They say that the stars can sometimes come down and land on the ground take their babies away.
Yes.
That's part of their folklore.
Wow, that's amazing.
The young kids disappear, yeah. I actually got told not to say what I'd said when I was in America. They said it was politically incorrect for me to use the word pickaninnies.
Wow.
But that's what the Aboriginals call their little babies. They call them pickaninnies.
Yep.
But it's got some very derogatory connotations in the States. You can't use that in America, or you get lynched if you say something like that. Apparently.
Oh, okay. Well, for everyone listening, there's the explanation. So we
not upset anybody.
No, it's not about upsetting people. It's information. So we went to Space Rock, and Space Rock is only about 40 minutes from me here in Australia, and that's where Biami, according to the Aboriginals, and his 3 sons first stepped on Earth. They landed in their spaceship and left later on, but they've marked it, and there's a bipedal human there with a suit, with a cuffed sleeve and what looks sort of like a Star Trek kind of symbol communicator.
The rock art's amazing, isn't it? The rock art.
Yeah, the rock art. Yeah, and so we've been up there, George, and enjoyed that. It took ages to find it, but from the view of where the rock art is, and all along this line of say the mountain tops across from where it is down the coast, this was the Aboriginal communication highway. This area, so all the commuting peoples would walk through this area and communicate with the others, and it was an educational kind of library set up here of a multicultural, multi-village or people's walkway. Extraordinary place. I'm really fortunate. We've also been to the glyphs at Gosford. I'm only 5 minutes from that, and
okay. I haven't seen those. I've heard of those, but I haven't seen them.
Well, if you'd like to see them, you by all means keep in touch with me and come up and if you're ever on the coast, just north of Sydney, at Gosford, if you wanted to go see the Gosford Glyphs, you're welcome. I'll take you there personally. It's an awesome place. There's a lot of stuff that's been manufactured after the fact, but the original ones are intact. And we should try to do it sooner or later, because I think there was a developer that was interested in buying the land and just mowing it all down because they don't care. So before it happens, you'd try and get some action going.
Have you got some good photographs of that?
Yes, but you're better off not in the middle of the day. Try to be either in the morning, because it's sort of easterly facing, and you'll get a better shadow line.
Right.
Yeah, it's pretty good. They are consistent. I've seen the experts talking about the glyphs themselves. The locals all say it was some nutter post World War II, a Dutch fellow who, they said they arrested making glyphs there. But the original glyphs are much older than the ones that they said that he was doing. So.
Right.
We believe the story to be accurate. All the glyphs themselves are written in the same direction, which is one of the things. If you're into ancient hieroglyphs from Egypt, you'll note that they can start left or right, but they all have to be consistent. So we found them to be as legitimate as you're ever going to get them, and the story is consistent with the story that was handed down. Also, the word Ra is sun in this particular part of Australian history. So Ra
Interesting.
was the sun god in Egypt, but in here, the colloquial term at the time in the Aboriginal language was Ra for sun. So for me, that all seems to make sense. It makes more sense than anything else.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's very interesting.
That ties it all up, because I have to tell you that the Aboriginal language was different everywhere. It wasn't the same language, and like the word kangaroo was only spoken. I think it was in I correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was only a Western Australian term in a particular area. It wasn't across the whole continent.
Yep. Right.
Everyone had a different name for it, and so yeah. See, that's what happens. This is what happens to Meki and I, right? We'll begin some research and say, okay, all we're looking for is, are the glyphs real? Then you find out there's a whole bunch of twists and turns, and there's a bunch of fakes, and then there's hoaxing, and then you find what the government says, and they said, no, there's no such thing, forget it, it's all rubbish. You go a bit further to find, well, let's read the glyphs. Try and measure the depth of the patina in it compared to the other stuff. We even went into the tomb. There's a tomb beneath, perfectly square cut tomb.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it was originally closed up by the council. Came in and closed it up, but someone had removed it, the capping, and it's quite tight in there. But the whole thing was covered over at one point by another stone over the top, which is since fallen away or broken up. It's only sandstone, so. But an extraordinary thing. So as we were going down through that, we didn't expect to find what we did, and the more you learn, the more questions you end up with.
Yeah. So that normally works, isn't it?
But you think it's going to be cut? It's going to be easy. It'll be solved. No, I'll just find this one thing out. That's all we need. You get half the story plus something else. You go chasing down that line. So, what's it like? How hard is from your perspective? What's it like? How difficult is it to research?
To research what? Any particular thing, or
anything? Just in general. Yeah,
it can be very hard to do research. So sometimes you can get a little nugget that shows up, but sometimes, more often than not, and there's a lot of obstacles in the way. But it's always an interesting story, Every now and then you can have a win, but it's not very often that happens,
Yeah. Do you know what? I'd like to see that Don Lane thing. That's got me thinking now. I can't take my mind from it.
The which?
The Don Lane show.
Oh yeah, because it's cut out just after I heard the dot, and that's all I heard.
Oh, I see.
The Don Lane show, yeah. Our technology sometimes has little glitches. I'm going to have to find out if Stan Deo did actually appear on the show. It might have been him, because Bill Chalker seemed to think that it was consistent with the kind of claims that he was making at one stage. That he was making these claims. But the way I was told the story, they didn't know who the guy was, and they just said he was some kind of American, like someone like a 4-star general or somebody from America who was visiting Australia with his wife, and just happened to decide to tell us while he was here.
Wow.
That he had this big secret, but and then he had to have an armed guard. Yeah, it's interesting. I'm trying to think if there's anything else about the case that we can sort of talk about. But there was at one stage we thought that the memorial plaque had disappeared. We thought it might have been stolen or something, but it's kept in down at Cape Otway it's a national park, and it's run by the local council, and you can't get in there without going in and paying to go in. They charge you about $30 a head to go into this park and to have the guided tour of the the lighthouse and everything, and to look at all the little buildings there. And the plaque is in that area, so you can't just lob up there and go there. You've got to. It's all locked up at night. You can't get in at night time, and you've got to pay to get in. So it's in a fairly secure area. But it did disappear for a while. Someone reported that it had disappeared. It turned out that the family took it away for a little while to restore it and to repair it and clean it up and fix it up and put it back. So it's back there now, fully restored. But for a while we thought that even the plaque had gone missing. But no, it didn't.
Oh, that's lucky.
It was actually in good hands all the time.
Huh. The Pine Gap and the that radar array off Western Australia were always something that I'd thought about, and I had one of my friends who was visiting Western Australia to take photos of that array, just to how close can you get? Is it like a radio tower which is only governed as a safety distance for the guy wires around? Usually it's fenced.
Oh, okay.
And he said, no, you can't go anywhere near this thing. And he said on full zoom, it was maybe about a tenth of the image inside the photo. It was very small, and you had to be miles and miles away from it. But he said this array was huge. And then I started thinking, well, what other places what do you have, as restricted access in Australia? Because I always thought that, you'd be able to go anywhere you wanted, get a 4-wheel drive and just do whatever you want. Well, no, you can't.
Right.
Gee, that's extraordinary. Why is that at 5:26? What time is it? Is that the end of the show already? It is. Look at that. My goodness me. Well, thank you very much for George for being with us, George Simpson. And look out for next week's show, 234. My goodness me, it just keeps going. Take care. Stay tuned for a roundtable.